The morning rain had soaked through Amelia Richardson's coat by the time she reached the Cook County Courthouse steps at 6:45 a.m. Her car had broken down 3 blocks away, battery dead of course, on the most important morning of her professional life, and she'd been forced to walk through Chicago's February downpour, carrying her leather briefcase and the garment bag containing her judge's. The bag's zipper had broken somewhere between the car and the courthouse, and now the black fabric peeked through the torn vinyl, getting wetter with every step. She looked like disaster, hair plastered to her head, expensive wool coat dripping water onto marble steps, her usually immaculate appearance reduced to something passers-by might mistake for someone down on their luck. But Amelia didn't have time to care. She was due in courtroom 7 in 15 minutes for her first day as a newly appointed circuit court judge, one of the youngest black women ever elevated to the bench in Illinois. The main courthouse entrance was locked until 8 a.m., but judges had access through the secured side door using their credentials. Amelia reached into her briefcase for the access card she'd picked up yesterday, the plastic rectangle representing 6 years of law school, 15 years of prosecution, and countless nights studying until her eyes burned. "Hey, you can't be here." The officer blocking the entrance was maybe 35, white, with a face that suggested he smiled rarely, and meant it less. His name tag read Webb. One hand rested on his belt, body language screaming authority mixed with contempt. "This entrance is for courthouse personnel only. Public entrance opens at 8. If you've ever been judged by your appearance before anyone bothered to know your story, stay with us. What happens next will remind you why assumptions are dangerous, especially when you make them about the wrong person." Amelia straightened despite the "Officer, I work here. I'm looking for my access card. It's in my briefcase." Her voice was calm, professional, the tone she'd perfected over years as a prosecutor. Webb's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from this entrance. If you worked here, you'd have proper identification readily available. Since you clearly don't, I'm asking you to leave the premises." "I understand how this looks," Amelia began, shifting her briefcase. "But if you'll give me a moment." Webb moved closer, hand on his radio. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. Step away, or I'll have you removed for trespassing." Amelia felt anger mixing with humiliation in her chest. "Officer Webb, my name is Amelia Richardson. I'm a newly appointed judge, and today is my first day. My access card is somewhere in my—" "Sure you are," Webb interrupted, sarcasm dripping. "And I'm the Chief Justice. Look, lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but this courthouse sees people every day trying to talk their way into places they don't belong. You need to leave, now." He reached for her arm, and Amelia stepped back. The movement confirmed something in Webb's mind. "Collins," he called. "Need assistance removing someone from the secured area." The second officer approached, younger, eager. His eyes traveled over Amelia, the wet clothes, the dripping briefcase, the torn garment bag, and she saw his assessment lamp. Homeless, confused, definitely not someone who belonged. "This woman is refusing to leave despite multiple requests," Webb explained. "I believe she may be experiencing some crisis." Amelia's composure cracked. "I am not experiencing a crisis. I'm trying to get to my chambers for my swearing-in ceremony. If you just call the administrative office." But Webb was already moving, gripping her elbow with practiced firmness. "Ma'am, you're coming with us." Collins took her other arm, and suddenly Amelia was being steered away from her briefcase, nearly slipping, the garment bag dragging on. Wet pavement. "Let go of me," she said, voice sharp with authority that meant nothing when no one believed you possessed it. They marched her across the plaza past early morning employees who stopped to watch. Amelia caught glimpses of people she'd met during orientation, prosecutors she'd worked with, clerks who knew exactly who she was. But from a distance, in the rain, with officers gripping her arms, even they seemed uncertain. Webb and Collins deposited her at the public entrance like, "Refuse. Stay here until 8 when public hours begin," Webb instructed, dismissing her completely. Amelia stood in the rain, shaking with rage so intense she could taste it. Her briefcase was muddy, garment bag soaked, and somewhere above her, people were gathering for the ceremony that would make her a judge. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed the administrative office. Time to make calls, time to let people know what had happened, and time for Officer Webb to learn a lesson about assumptions that she suspected he'd never forget. Inside the courthouse, Officer Marcus Webb returned to his post feeling satisfied. In 8 years of courthouse security, he'd developed what he considered excellent instinct for spotting people who didn't belong, and that wet, confused black woman definitely hadn't belonged near the secured entrance. He didn't care how expensive her ruined clothes had been. Homeless people wore donated designer items all the time. The desperate insistence that she worked here. Classic signs of someone trying to talk their way into restricted areas. Collins joined him, shaking rain from his uniform. "Think she'll come back at 8? Webb shrugged. Maybe, probably looking for a public defender or social services. We did her a favor, getting her away before she did something that would get her arrested. Neither man noticed courthouse employees who'd witnessed the incident now hurrying toward administrative offices, phones already out, faces concerned. Outside in the rain, Amelia reached Samuel Chen, the courthouse's administrative director. Samuel, it's Amelia Richardson. I need you to listen carefully because I'm about to tell you something that's going to ruin someone's morning. She explained in precise prosecutorial detail. The broken-down car, the appearance at the secured entrance, the officer's refusal to verify her identity before physically removing her. Samuel's response was immediate and horrified. Jesus Christ. Amelia, are you still outside? I'm sending someone down right now. Judge Morrison's in the building. She'll come get you immediately. And Amelia, I am so sorry. This never should have happened. His voice dropped. I know those officers. I know exactly who did this. We're going to handle it. Judge Linda Morrison appeared within minutes. Her face, fury and concern mixed. She was 62, white, with 20 years on the bench, long enough to command immediate respect from every officer. When she saw Amelia standing there soaked, her expression turned thunderous. Good Lord, come with me. Now. She draped her own coat over Amelia's shoulders and led her toward the secured entrance where Webb still stood. Webb saw Judge Morrison approaching and straightened immediately. Good morning, Your Honor. Terrible weather. Morrison didn't slow. Officer Webb, this is Judge Amelia Richardson. She was appointed to the circuit court bench last week. Today is her first day, approximately 15 minutes ago. You physically removed her from this entrance and left her in the... Is that correct? Color drained from Webb's face. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. She didn't... There was no identification. Morrison's voice was ice. Did you ask for her name? Did you call the administrative office to verify? Did you do anything except decide based on her appearance that she didn't belong? Webb's silence was damning. Collins looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Come, Amelia, Morrison said. Your chambers are ready. These officers and I will be having a much longer conversation later. In chambers, Amelia finally allowed herself to fall apart slightly. Her assistant Jennifer took one look and began damage control. Dry clothes materialized. Coffee appeared. The torn garment bag was replaced. Jennifer worked with efficient compassion, asking no questions, simply helping Amelia transform from rain-soaked woman, ejected from her courthouse, to the composed judge who would be sworn in within the hour. But even as appearance was restored, humiliation burned. Amelia thought about every black woman who'd experienced similar treatment, the assumption of wrongness, the refusal to listen, the immediate leap to removal. She thought about how many people Webb had treated this way over years, how many lacked credentials to fight back, how many simply accepted they didn't belong because authority figures said so. The swearing-in ceremony proceeded as planned. Amelia stood before a packed courtroom. Colleagues, family, friends, prosecutors she'd worked with, defendants whose cases she'd handled fairly. The chief judge administered the oath, and Amelia repeated words about justice and equality, and upholding the Constitution. Words that felt both sacred and hollow, given what had happened an hour earlier. When she turned to face the courtroom, her robe, she saw Webb standing at the back, his face ashen, as reality crashed down. After the ceremony, Samuel pulled Amelia aside. I've placed both officers on administrative leave pending investigation. This is being taken seriously. But I need to know, do you want to pursue formal charges? Amelia held up a hand. I don't want them charged. I want a full investigation into their conduct, their history with people of color, and retraining on implicit bias for every officer in this building. And Samuel, I want their personnel files, every complaint, every incident, every evaluation, because I'm betting. This wasn't isolated. Samuel nodded grimly. I'll have everything on your desk tomorrow morning. The courthouse grapevine worked faster than official communication. By noon, everyone knew. The new black judge humiliated on her first day, physically removed by officers who'd decided she looked wrong for them. Some were outraged, others unsurprised, quietly admitting they'd seen Webb treat minority visitors with suspicion while waving white visitors through. The incident had exposed something ugly festering beneath professional veneer. The formal investigation revealed what Amelia had suspected. Webb's personnel file contained 17 complaints over 8 years, all from people of color, all dismissed as misunderstandings. Several complained about being questioned extensively, despite carrying proper ID. Others described being followed, watched, or made to wait for verification. White visitors weren't required to provide. The most damning evidence came from security footage Samuel pulled at Amelia's request. Week after week, cameras showed Webb's double standard in stark clarity. A black attorney in expensive suit stopped and questioned extensively. A white woman in jeans waved through without a glance. An elderly black man with a cane made to prove his legitimacy. Meanwhile, young white men in casual clothes moved through checkpoints without scrutiny. Amelia watched hours of footage in her chamber, Jennifer beside her, both growing increasingly angry as the pattern became undeniable. "He's been doing this for years," Jennifer said quietly. "How is that possible?" Amelia knew exactly how. Because Webb's supervisors were comfortable with his definition of who belonged. Because people he targeted had less power to complain effectively. Because institutional racism didn't require hatred, just indifference to suffering of people who looked different. She called a meeting with Samuel and Howard Patterson, the security director who'd overseen the unit 15 years. Patterson sat across from her desk, discomfort obvious. "Mr. Patterson, your department has a systemic problem with racial profiling. The evidence is overwhelming. You've either been unaware, which suggests incompetence, or aware and indifferent, which suggests complicity. Which is it?" Patterson shifted. "Judge Richardson, we take all complaints seriously." Amelia cut him off. "You've had 17 complaints about Webb alone over 8 years, all dismissed. I've reviewed investigation reports. They're cursory at best, deliberately dismissive at. Don't insult my intelligence claiming you take complaints seriously when evidence suggests the opposite." Samuel spoke up carefully. "Judge Richardson has requested mandatory implicit bias training for all security staff, revised complaint procedures, and body cameras for officers in public-facing positions. The administrative committee agreed. This begins immediately." Patterson's face reddened. "Body cameras? We're courthouse security, not street patrol. That seems..." Amelia leaned forward. "That seems like accountability, which has been lacking. Officers with nothing to hide have nothing to fear from cameras. Unless you're suggesting your staff routinely engage in behavior they wouldn't want documented." After Patterson left looking defeated and angry, Samuel exhaled heavily. "You're making enemies, Amelia. Patterson has connections on the county board." Amelia smiled without humor. "Good. Let them be mad. Maybe they should have thought about that before building a system that treated people like me as inherently suspicious. And Samuel? I want review of every trespassing arrest at this courthouse in 5 years. I want to know how many were people of color simply in the wrong place according to officers who decided they didn't belong." The data was staggering. 73% of trespassing arrests over 5 years were people of color, despite representing only 32% of courthouse visitors. Based on case filing demographics, most charges were eventually dropped, but not before people spent hours in holding, missed work, incurred legal expenses, and were marked as arrested at courthouse, a red flag impacting future employment and housing. Amelia read case after case. Anger built. A young black law student arrested for suspicious behavior that was studying in public seating. A Latino man arrested for trespassing when he got lost seeking the right courtroom. An elderly Asian woman arrested for creating disturbance when upset after being questioned repeatedly despite carrying jury duty summons. Each followed the same pattern. Assumptions made, explanations disbelieved, authority used to punish people for looking wrong. She scheduled a press conference against Samuel's advice. On the courthouse steps where she'd been left standing in rain, Amelia faced reporters and described not just what happened to her, but what had been happening to countless others for years. I am privileged," she said clearly. "I have credentials, connections, presumption of competence. Most people treated this way have none of those protections. They're told they're wrong, that they don't belong, that their presence in spaces where they have every right to be is suspicious." She held up statistics, let cameras zoom in. "This isn't about one bad officer. This is about a system that allowed racial profiling to flourish under the guise of security. And it ends now." The story exploded across Chicago news, then national. The optics were perfect. A black judge humiliated on her first day, exposing years of discriminatory practices. Other courthouses examined their protocol. Civil rights organizations filed complaints. The Department of Justice opened an investigation. Webb was fired, termination upheld despite union appeals. Collins chose resignation over retraining. Patterson was reassigned to administrative duties, and Amelia became known not just as a judge, but as someone who used power to expose injustice rather than accepting her place within the system perpetuating. 6 months later, Amelia reviewed a case that felt uncomfortably familiar. A young black woman named Keisha Williams had been arrested for trespassing after security claimed she became aggressive and non-compliant when questioned about her business. Keisha insisted she'd been calm, explained she was there for child support, that officers simply decided she didn't belong. The prosecutor's office was moving forward with charges, a misdemeanor that would saddle her with criminal record. Amelia called the prosecutor, Sarah Mitchell, who'd been with the office 2 years. "Ms. Mitchell, walk me through why you're pursuing charges." Sarah's voice was uncertain, sensing a trap. "Your Honor, security officers have sworn statements that Ms. Williams refused lawful orders and became physically aggressive. They followed protocol." Amelia leaned back. Did you watch the security footage? A pause. The officer's statements were deemed sufficient for charges, Your Honor. So, that's a no. Amelia pulled up footage on her computer. I'm emailing you a video. Watch it carefully. Then come to my chambers tomorrow prepared to discuss why pursuing these charges serves justice. She hung up before Sarah could respond. Sent the footage, 20 minutes of Keisha being questioned, followed, doubted, finally arrested for existing in courthouse, while black and poor. Next morning, Sarah arrived looking shaken. Your Honor, I watched the footage. I also pulled the officer's personnel files. Both have multiple complaints for similar incidents. Amelia nodded. So what's your recommendation? Sarah took a breath. I'm dismissing charges, and recommending we review every trespassing case these officers were involved in for 3 years. If this is their pattern, we may have criminalized people who did nothing wrong. It was exactly what Amelia hoped for, but she pushed further. Why did it take a judge calling you in for you to examine this critically? Why didn't complaint patterns raise red flags? Sarah flushed. Honestly, because until your case made news, I didn't question what security told me. I assumed they were credible, that assessments were accurate. I never considered their threat perception might be race-based rather than behavior-based. That was my fail. Amelia appreciated the honesty. You're not the villain. You're the person who assumed a system was fair because you'd never experienced it being unfair to you. That's privilege. Not malicious, just invisible. The question is what you do now that you see it. Sarah met her eyes. I do better. Question more. Watch footage before filing. Remember that officers, like everyone, have biases affecting their perception. Over following months, Amelia used her position to implement rippling changes. She started a mentorship program, connecting young attorneys of color with established judges, creating pathways previously closed. She worked with law schools providing courthouse internships for students from underrepresented communities, and she attended community meetings in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods, listening to experiences with the justice system and seeking ways to bridge gaps between law and justice. But the work took a toll. Amelia received weekly hate mail, anonymous letters calling her divisive, accusing her of playing the race card, suggesting she should be grateful rather than critical. Some came from citizens resenting her push for change. Others, more disturbing, came from within the legal community. Prosecutors feeling she undermined law enforcement, defense attorneys thinking she was too soft, fellow judges believing she made them look bad by exposing problems they preferred ignoring. One letter came from Webb himself, written from his suburban apartment after losing his position. The tone was bitter, self-pitying, insisting he'd done nothing wrong, that he'd been doing his job, that Amelia ruined his life over a misunderstanding. Reading it, Amelia felt complex mixture of anger and something close to pity. Webb genuinely couldn't see what he'd done wrong because he'd spent 8 years being rewarded for behavior that should have been stopped immediately. She didn't respond to Webb, but did respond to a documentary filmmaker wanting to explore implicit bias in courthouse security nationwide. The resulting film, The Wrong Face, featured Amelia's story alongside dozens of others. People denied access to their own trials, parents arrested attending children's hearings, attorneys of color treated like criminals until producing bar cards. White attorneys were never asked to show. The film sparked conversations in courthouses across the country. Some judges implemented immediate reforms. Others defended their systems, insisting problems were isolated. But the conversation itself mattered, forcing institutions to examine practices they'd never questioned, to consider whose comfort they prioritized and whose they ignored. Amelia's chambers became safe space for people who'd experienced similar treatment, but never felt empowered to report it. Jennifer fielded calls from clerks, attorneys, defendants, families sharing stories of being profiled, questioned unnecessarily, made to feel unwelcome in buildings supposed to serve them. Each story reinforced what Amelia knew. Her experience hadn't been unique. It had simply been visible because of who she'd turned out to be. One afternoon, a young black law clerk named Marcus knocked on her door. Judge Richardson, 2 years ago. Webb stopped me in the cafeteria, asked for my ID 3 times, questioned why I was there, followed me back to chambers where I worked. I didn't report it because I was terrified it would affect my career. When you came forward, when you showed even a judge could be treated this way, I realized the problem wasn't me, it was the system. I wanted to thank you. The 1-year anniversary of Amelia's appointment coincided with the Department of Justice investigation findings release. The report was damning. Systemic discriminatory patterns, inadequate training, complaint system designed to protect officers rather than serve victims, and leadership that consistently minimized concerns about racial profiling. The DOJ mandated sweeping reforms including federal oversight of courthouse security, mandatory quarterly arrest pattern audits, and complete hiring and training procedure overhaul. Amelia attended the press conference where findings were announced. standing beside civil rights leaders and DOJ officials. She reflected on the journey from that rainy morning when she'd been removed from her courthouse to this moment of institutional accountability. "This report confirms what many have known for years," she said, "that our justice system's failures aren't individual, they're structural. Fixing them requires more than good intentions. It requires systemic change backed by oversight and accountability." She looked directly into cameras. "To everyone who's been treated as suspicious, as wrong, as unwelcome in spaces where you had every right to be, I see you. Your experiences are valid, and slowly, painfully, systems that failed you are being forced to change. It's not enough, not nearly enough, but it's a start." The words resonated beyond Chicago, sparking conversations in courthouses nationwide about security practices, implicit bias, and whose comfort was prioritized at whose dignity's expense. But the most meaningful moment came not from the DOJ report or press conferences, but from quiet interaction in courtroom 7 3 months later. Amelia was presiding over a preliminary hearing when she noticed a young black woman in the gallery, professionally dressed but looking terrified. During recess, the woman approached. "Your Honor, I know this isn't appropriate, but I need to thank you. 6 months ago, I was arrested here for trespassing. Charges were dropped, but it destroyed me. I thought I'd done something wrong just by existing. Then I saw your interview, learned what happened to you, and realized it wasn't my fault. You gave me permission to be angry instead of ashamed. That changed my life." The woman was Keisha Williams, the same case Amelia had pushed Sarah Mitchell to. After charges were dismissed, Keisha had returned to school, was now working toward a paralegal degree, wanted to help people navigate the same system that had almost criminalized her for no reason. "You inspired me," Keisha said simply. "You showed me people like us belong everywhere, including here. And I decided I wanted to be part of making this system better." Watching Keisha walk away, Amelia felt something shift. The anger and humiliation that had defined her first year on the bench began transforming into something else. Purpose, maybe, or hope that meaningful change was actually possible. She'd spent 12 months fighting battles that exhausted her, making enemies in a system preferring comfort over justice, using her position to expose truths powerful people wanted buried. And here was evidence it mattered, that visibility created possibility for people taught they were problems rather than solutions. That evening, Amelia returned home to her Hyde Park apartment, poured wine, and sat on her balcony overlooking Lake Michigan. She thought about Webb, probably nursing resentment, self-righteousness. She thought about all the people he'd treated poorly over 8 years, casual cruelties that had been his normal. She thought about systemic change, about how difficult it was to transform institutions built on assumptions serving some while harming others. Her phone rang. Samuel Chen, with news that the county board approved funding for expanded implicit bias training and creation of an ombudsman position to investigate courthouse security. Small victories, incremental progress, the slow grinding of institutions toward something more just. "It's not enough," Samuel said, reading her silence. "But it's more than we had a year ago." Amelia agreed, knowing change was always insufficient when measured against harm already done, but necessary nonetheless. The following week brought unexpected news. The State Bar Association wanted to honor Amelia with their Civil Rights Award for her advocacy work. The ceremony would be large, public, media covered, exactly the attention she'd spent her career avoiding. But Jennifer convinced her to accept. "Judge, people need to see someone like you succeeding, speaking truth, refusing to be silent, especially young black women who've been taught to make themselves smaller. You show them they don't have to shrink." At the award ceremony, Amelia wore her judge's robe, the same one soaked and torn that rainy morning, now professionally cleaned and repaired. Standing at the podium accepting the award, she looked out at an audience including legal professionals, activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens who'd followed her story. "A year ago," she began, "I was physically removed from my courthouse because 2 officers decided I didn't look like I belonged. They made that decision in seconds, based entirely on appearance. And their assumptions, which should have been corrected immediately, were instead supported by a system valuing their authority over my dignity." She paused. "I share this, not for sympathy, but awareness. Because what happened to me happens to countless people every single day. Anywhere people are granted authority to decide who belongs, most don't have credentials or platform to fight back. So this award, it's not really for me. It's for every person told they're wrong for existing in spaces they have every right to occupy." 2 years after the incident defining her entry into judiciary, Amelia stood before a packed Northwestern Law School auditorium, invited to speak to incoming first years about her journey from prosecutor to judge. She looked out at faces representing every background, some confident, others uncertain, all at the beginning of careers that would shape justice for decades. Among them sat Keisha Williams, now enrolled on a scholarship Amelia had helped establish for people impacted by the criminal justice system. When I was appointed to the bench, Amelia began, I thought the hardest part would be interpreting law and rendering fair judgments. I was wrong. The hardest part has been confronting the reality that our justice system isn't just about law. It's about who we assume deserves justice, who we believe when they speak, whose comfort we prioritize, and whose humanity we're willing to overlook for the sake of order. She told them the story, not as victim seeking sympathy, but as illustration of a larger truth. Those officers didn't see a judge that morning. They saw a black woman who looked wrong, who didn't fit their mental image of who belonged, and everything that followed, their refusal to verify, their physical removal of me, their certainty they were right, all stemmed from assumptions our society has taught them were legitimate. They weren't monsters. They were products of a system rewarding certain types of suspicion. The room was silent. Here's what I need you to understand as you enter this profession, Amelia continued firmly. Every one of you will have power over people's lives. You'll decide who to prosecute, who to defend, how to interpret facts, which witnesses to believe. And unless you actively work to examine your own biases, you'll unconsciously perpetuate systems that have been unjust for generations. The question isn't whether you have biases. Everyone does. The question is whether you'll do the difficult work of identifying and challenging. She shared the changes that had occurred. The DOJ oversight, the body cameras, the revised training, the dozens of wrongful arrests overturned after footage revealed the same patterns she'd experienced. But policy changes aren't enough, she emphasized. Because at the end of the day, justice depends on individual people making individual choices about who they see as human, who they believe, whose story they're willing to hear, even when it contradicts their assumption. A student raised her hand, a young Latina woman. Judge Richardson, how do you handle the anger? How do you maintain faith in the system? Amelia appreciated the honesty. I don't maintain faith in the system, she answered bluntly. I maintain faith in people's capacity to change it. The system is flawed, deeply, structurally flawed. But systems are built by people, which means they can be rebuilt by different people with different values. That's why your generation matters so much. You're not inheriting a perfect system to preserve. You're inheriting a broken fix. After her speech, students lined up sharing their own stories of discrimination, asking advice about maintaining integrity in a profession often rewarding compromise, expressing determination to be the generation finally delivering on the Constitution's promise of equal justice. Amelia listened to each one, offered wisdom she could, and felt something she hadn't felt in years, optimism that real change might be possible. Webb's story had a different trajectory. After being fired, he'd struggled to find work in law enforcement. The termination and circumstances made him unhireable in positions requiring trust. He'd eventually found work in private security, a job paying less and offering less authority. Friends reported Webb still insisted he'd done nothing wrong, that Amelia had been the problem, that he'd been scapegoated for politically correct reasons. But not everyone involved followed Webb's path. Collins, the younger officer who'd helped remove Amelia, had done something different. After resigning, he'd enrolled in community college, taking courses in criminal justice reform, implicit bias, and policing history in black communities. He'd reached out to Amelia through Jennifer, apologizing without expectation of forgiveness, explaining that seeing footage of his own behavior had horrified him, that he'd begun the difficult work of understanding how he'd become someone who could treat another human that way. Amelia agreed to meet him, coffee in neutral location, both nervous. I can't make it right, Collins said, voice tight with shame. But I wanted you to know what happened changed me. I thought I was learning good police work from Webb. Instead, I was learning how to be cruel while feeling righteous, and I'm spending the rest of my life trying to be better. Amelia listened, assessed his sincerity, and eventually offered something she hadn't planned: connection to a restorative justice program helping former law enforcement understand their impact and potentially. 3 years after that rainy morning, Amelia's chambers held different energy. Walls displayed photos from community events, letters from people she'd helped, art from youth programs she'd sponsored. Her reputation had evolved beyond the judge who'd been wronged into the judge who used her platform for systematic change. She presided with fairness people noticed, called out injustice when she saw it, and created space in her courtroom for dignity others often denied. On the anniversary of her appointment, Jennifer knocked with a visitor. Jasmine, the teenager from an earlier award ceremony, now 19 and flourishing in college, entered carrying flowers. Judge Richardson, I got my acceptance letter to Northwestern Law. I wanted you to be the first person I told, because none of this would have happened without you showing me it was possible. Amelia hugged her fiercely. You did this, Jasmine. You earned it. I just refused to be invisible. After Jasmine left, Amelia stood at her window overlooking the city, thinking about trajectories and choices. If this story moved you, Share it with someone who needs to hear that assumptions have consequence, that how we treat people when we think they don't matter reveals who we really are, and that speaking truth to power can create ripples that change systems. Be the person who sees. Be the person who speaks up. That's how we build a world where everyone is treated as they deserve, with respect, humanity, and the presumption that they belong exactly where they are.